Right. Welcome back, everyone. Before we get started on our second panel discussion, a quick reminder that you can add your questions for our panelists to the session Q&A, or you can choose to upvote questions that are already asked there. But please feel free to ask your questions there so that we can, put them up during the discussion and they can be answered. And if you experience any technical issues, please go ahead to the chat box and set a private message for our tech support team. You should see their name labeled as tech support under UofT Talks, so please feel free to reach out there.
So this discussion will be moderated once again by Bob McDonald, who I would like to welcome back on the stage. And with that, I am also thrilled to introduce our second panel for this evening. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Dr. Kristi Ray, an aerospace medicine resident at the University of Texas, Dr. Joan Seri, the Director of Occupational Medicine at the University of Toronto and consultant to the Canadian Space Agency, and Dr. Konrad Shostak, a professor of bioethics of space exploration at Yale University. I'll pass the stage off to you, Bob. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kyla, and welcome back, everyone, to our second panel today. I was really happy with the first one. I thought we covered a lot of really interesting topics about the state of space medicine. Now we're going to look to the future. What's coming? What's down the line? And right at the moment, the Canadian Space Agency is hosting the Deep Space Healthcare Challenge, and this is an initiative to bring in industry, universities, even individuals to develop innovative technologies that can be used both in space and on the ground. A lot of diagnostic tools. That's, for example, there's a device you put on your head, and it's an MRI that you wear instead of having to put your head in a big thing. So I want to start with Dr. Seri. Why do you think it's important to bring in all of these different stakeholders when it comes to space medicine?
First of all, having done a PhD in stakeholder engagement, I can say most certainly that, when you involve more stakeholders, you get a variety of perspectives that you may not have otherwise anticipated. And I think an example of that that we're seeing now is with what's happening with commercial space. And I think there's been allusion to this in the prior panel. And I suppose maybe we'll even talk more about it now. But as space opens up to a wider variety of people, some of them less screened medically than others, that allows us to think about, engage, and bring a different conversation to the forefront. A conversation that revolves not only around that individual, but also their healthcare conditions. But furthermore, there is another concept, and I'm not sure if I should bring it up now or if I should wait to address it another question that relates to the concept of incentivization and how when individuals and businesses and scientists are incentivized to do something, the speed with which development can happen and the creativity of those solutions, I think, is enhanced.
Dr. Ray, you're nodding a lot on this. What do you see are the key elements to making this happen, to sort of go outside of the box of the space agencies and reach out to the broader community to get innovation?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Going off what Dr. Seri said, with commercial space, I mean, we can, it's not, like our space agencies that have to go through so much medical screening to make sure they're like these perfect specimens. Versus now with commercialization, we're hoping to get people with other issues like diabetes and heart arrhythmias and things like that that we're ready for, but we're kind of a little nervous about. So it's really important, especially for diversity, to basically prove that these people can go to space. And, just to prove that, a lot of medical device companies are starting to, reach out and be like, can our insulin pumps go through a centrifuge? things like that, so it can handle the G's. But I do think we really do need to engage the whole community, and I feel like definitely comes with grassroots, especially telling even young kids, doesn't matter if you have a physical disability or a medical issue, you can go to space and we can support you. And I feel like that in itself with the grassroots will kind of uplift people, and then hopefully get these larger stakeholders involved. Like mentioned before, incentive is amazing, and we definitely need incentive, especially if we have some monetary backing behind it, it will definitely move quicker. I definitely think getting smaller communities involved and excited about commercialization in the future of space is definitely where we should start.
Dr. Sochik, space medicine is kind of a niche market. It's very specialized for the space application. So how different is it from traditional medicine or regular medicine, or is it not, or is it similar? Are there parallels?
I think that maybe I should start from this, that I am a philosopher and bioethicist, so when I am approaching these issues, I am rather thinking from philosophical, ethical, and bioethical point of view. So what I am interested regarding differences and similarities between space medicine and other fields, I have in mind usually ethical and bioethical differences. So I think that space medicine offers a lot of new ethical and bioethical challenges. However, the question arises if we will look at these challenges like different from other medical fields in qualitative or quantitative sense. For instance, my first thought is that space medicine from ethical point of view belongs to special category which we already know on Earth, like medicine of extreme environment, like military medicine, like medicine of battlefield. In ethical terms, is the same or similar, like military ethics, the ethics of battlefield, or the ethics of Antarctic expedition or extreme environments in general. But anyway, I think that despite similarities, there is still something new and original from bioethical point of view regarding ethics and bioethics of space medicine. For instance, my point is that I expect that some medical procedures in space may change their status when compared with their status on Earth. I mean, for instance, euthanasia or other procedures which are usually controversial or which we treat in careful way on Earth, or which we treat like something optional or extraordinary, they can become ordinary in the context of space, for instance. So
can you give me some examples of how the ethics would be different in space?
Yes, of course. For instance, like some procedures regarding the end of human life due to scarce resources, due to no opportunity for urgent evacuation. I mean, rather long-term missions. So what we treat, I mean that some procedures which we treat as standard, they can be impossible to apply in the context of space. So my point is that when we start to exploit and explore space broader and deeper, we should be ready for some challenges for our morality, that we will face some serious ethical challenges. But of course, some comparisons we can find now during COVID pandemic, where the shortage of medical resources and medical personnel also led to some difficult situations. So it's like emergency, like medicine or healthcare in a normal situation and emergency situation. But I mean that all space exploration can be all-time permanent emergency situation.
We've been, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to ask whether or not I could also make a comment in a more concrete way about that same question, if that's okay with you. So when I think about space medicine, it's in terms of disciplines in medicine, it's a component of a bigger discipline called aerospace medicine. And how is that different from other disciplines? And it really relates to the environment in which the individual lives, works, and practices. And so it is a microgravity environment. It is an environment with other unique challenges that we don't have on space, for example, radiation, which makes it different. But in other ways, it is actually quite similar. The discipline of occupational medicine, which is my specialty by training, so that's why I'm, speaking about it, I guess, is because, or is a discipline in which one typically deals with healthy individuals in an unhealthy environment, or an unhealthy individual in a healthy environment. So you can think about the individual and the environment, and it's the environment that makes space quite different. But another thing that makes it similar to other disciplines is that there are challenges with the delivery of the care in terms of the distance, the access to professionals. We think about the Canadian North. And so space medicine really, the Canadian North really is an analog for space. It's a sparsely populated area. It's very distant from definitive care in many cases. There can be significant time lags and lack of resource. And so in that way, space medicine is quite similar to the way medicine is practiced in some places on this planet.
We've heard a lot in the past from the experience on the International Space Station and on the Mir Space Station before that, Sally before that, of people suffering from things like bone loss and heart, things that Bob Thirst was talking about before in the last one. So we know that now. We know that space is an unhealthy place for the human body. So what's next? Where is space medicine going from this point? Dr. Ray?
So that's a great question. So my background is in diving medicine. So I basically work with pressurizations, putting people under pressure. So that's kind of been my research activity and interest since I have joined the team over at NASA. And basically, the way I look at it, it's some issues that we already know you're going to have bone loss. We already know you're going to have issues with pressure, pressurization, especially with your interocular pressure. But a big thing is what's going to happen when we go to a lunar base. What kind of pressure are we going to use? So what I always tell people is International Space Station is like living at sea level. It's pressurized to where we live on Earth. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to have that on lunar and Mars missions. So it's almost going to be living like we're at altitude. And then of course, what kind of oxygenation are we going to need? What kind of percentage are we going to need? So we're going to need a higher percentage of oxygen, but how do we battle? Do we give you oxygen or do we start a fire? So those are research questions that I think are very pertinent, especially looking at medicine. Space medicine in the future is how are people going to react to these pressurizations? How are we going to do exploration? How are we going to do spacewalks and kind of explore our environment? We have these issues with pressurization and oxygen. And how are we going to have medical capabilities such as, is our ultrasound machine going to work at a hyperbaric, hypoxic environment, or is it totally going to break down? And these are questions that, a lot of us feel we have to answer before we kind of go out there.
Dr. Sari?
Yeah, sure. I could add to that too. One of the things that we've learned is that we don't know what we don't know. As the mission duration extends from relatively shorter duration to longer duration missions, we're continuing to learn about changes in the human body and our capability to adapt. So one of the questions I have is, what are the limits to human adaptation as we keep extending our experience with space? How much can we actually tolerate? And indeed, how much can an individual who's not highly screened tolerate as we start to learn about the capabilities of individuals that may have some underlying conditions. We don't know what the limit to the duration of life, I guess, in space is. And there still remains significant risks that have not been mitigated. For example, radiation and some of the confinement concerns.
Dr. Sochik, we have a question here from the audience saying, do you think that people, that is researchers, governments, spaceflight companies, and the public are considering the bioethics of space exploration enough? And if not, what should we be paying attention to in the future?
I think that bioethics today is considered only in very narrow understanding from clinical point of view. I mean, such issues like which are basic and necessary, like the principle of autonomy and the rule of informed consent or privacy of medical data of astronauts, which operate in International Space Station. This is something minimum which is needed, but there is big critique around that. If these astronauts are really fully autonomous, if they know that they shouldn't reject participation in some experiments, that they expect that they will be not invited later. This competition is very high. The number of free spots is very small. So from that point of view, of course, someone can say that they know what they agree for, that some people compare them to soldiers, that this is hierarchy, they should follow orders, it's a militarized culture. But anyway, from ethical and bioethical point of view, this is challenging. And yes, this is what is not considered too much. Mostly future issues, which I expect that can come, like this one which I mentioned before, they are not considered because humans are not in deep space, so people don't think mostly these parties which you mentioned, like agencies, all parties involved, they don't find them important or urgent because it's not what currently happens. And I think that, as always, ethical issues, like in many other cases related to our history on Earth, they will be treated as something probably the least important until something happens, like some casualties or something, I believe. But maybe this is not what really agencies are thinking about.
There's an interesting corollary to that, or that's been brought up in movies. You talk about the sort of the military approach to things, but when you have a crew that's so far away from Earth, they don't have to take orders. They're on their own. They can do what they want.
Yes.
Right? Say, we're not going to do that. We're going to do it our way.
Yes. Right.
So that's it. Question here. This relates back to what we talked about in the last panel, but I'd like to get your opinions on this, all three of you. We know that space travel results in extensive negative multi-system impacts on the human body. With increasing commercialization of space travel, what are some of the bioethical considerations surrounding sending people to an environment known to cause such significant physical changes? And again, on top of that, sending out people who are not as well trained as astronauts are today.
I guess I should start, or
sure.
So yes, this is a very interesting point, because on the one side, advocates of making space more accessible, they should be happy that space is not a very exclusive environment which is reserved only for specially trained, privileged astronauts. But on the other side, really, if if in a situation if we are not sure how human body and psychology will work, even in short-term commercial flights, we really meet a big bioethical challenge. And I think that it also depends on what kind of requirements we want to set, because some of people who are advocates of open access to space, or as broad as possible, they will say that they are already saying that, like we don't put any requirements before you will enter a passenger airplane. The same we shouldn't do regarding spaceflight. So their point of view is that first, prepare such kind of technology, such kind of shelter, such kind of spacecraft to make them safe. First, so their point is that all requirements should be put on the side of environment and technology, not on human body. So I find this very difficult and challenging, and I think that we shouldn't forget here about capitalist context. So I am not sure how many future space businessmen is ready to wait many months, for instance, before their future space customers and space tourists will get full readiness to go to space. So I think that there's such issues involved, like full and open access for everyone in the name of equality. Of course, as far as access to such expensive light can be, it can be equal. On the other side, this expectations of space businessmen.
Dr. Shari?
Yeah, I have a comment. Although I understand in ethics the need for informed consent, and that it's difficult to provide informed consent when we're not sure what the consequence might be, but knowing the environment does have an effect on multi-organ systems. I think the question is, are those effects reversible or irreversible? In some contexts, they are reversible. But one of the things that I think is interesting that the whole conversation hasn't focused on is the absolute invaluable learning that comes from the development of countermeasures to prevent those known effects on the human body in space. So we have, our physical exercise countermeasures to counteract some of the known effects of bone loss and the physiology that's associated with microgravity, and the development of the different types of techniques they use, the learning and understanding of what types of illnesses can be prevented, and just in general, how to understand the human body well enough that, in fact, what we're looking at may be contributing to the prevention of Earth-based diseases by knowing about that.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Ray?
Yeah, so just to go on that also, I feel like we've said previously, like, you know what you know and you don't know what you don't know. So a lot of it, yes, is kind of, informed consent, but also a lot of it, commercialization, is if you have enough money to fly, you're going to fly. And we're just going to have to make it work. And that's kind of like you see kind of the fights going on currently is we're like, can we really send this person up? But people are like, yeah, they've got the money, they're going. And so it kind of just teaches you that, you have to have an open mind with it. But like mentioned before, like, put more money into prevention, try out new countermeasures, try and, get everything you can together. So when, they go to space, it's not like a total train wreck. But a lot of it is we don't know what's going to happen, right? So we know that there's all these risks to the human body. If you have another medical condition that we've never sent to space, I don't know what's going to happen to your body. You could go up to space and be totally fine, or you could go up and things go horribly wrong. And so a lot of it is putting your money into prevention, but also, having that back of the mind that we don't know, even as physicians, as scientists, as, PhDs, engineers, we know a lot, but there are certain limits that, we don't know what we don't know. So a lot of it, we're not going to know until we try.
Well,
there is a concept, oops, sorry. I was just going to say there's a concept of citizen science at play here, right? Like everything we know, everything we know in modern medicine, as opposed to what might have happened ethically in the distant past of how experiments were done on humans. but relates to the concept of volunteerism, right? And that individuals are interested in learning and contributing to some extent, and knowing that we have individuals that are excited to participate in space, we have a unique advantage then to make the most of our opportunities that lay in front of us around the learning that's possible by taking advantage of willing citizen scientists, as long as we can sort of protect their well-being to the best we can, and to gather their data. I mean, it's very important as we expand that we gather the data as best we can so we can learn.
In terms of sending them into a dangerous environment, we also have to convince them just how dangerous Mars really is. It's an awful place. It looks great, but boy, it's cold. There's no oxygen. There's no ozone layer. Man, you're putting yourself in a lot of hazard just by going there. Anyway, there's a question here for Dr. Ray that's pointed at you. From a physician's standpoint, then, why should investors focus on space medicine over issues on Earth?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think a lot comes back to a lot of the research that we get from space medicine is applicable back down to Earth. A lot of what we do regarding, radiation and bone loss, these are things that we can actively use to help advance medicine here on Earth. So I think that's a really important thing that people tend to forget, / we don't do a good enough job telling people, is that all the crazy stuff that we do up in space, we're doing it to benefit people here on Earth and also our environment here on Earth. And I think that's an important thing that we have to remember.
There's excuse me here. I just question here. If humanity wants to be spacefaring and a multiplanetary species, what are the ethics of human reproduction beyond Earth? Can we apply any philosophical framework to address this complex issue? So babies born on Mars or on the moon.
Yes, I guess that we can expect a lot of serious ethical and bioethical challenges. For instance, in this topic, the issue of abortion and germline gene editing, sex selection can be involved much more than on Earth. Because if we are talking about reproduction in space, I guess we are on such level of advanced medicine that germline gene editing will be something easily applied from medical point of view. So I believe that we will face such issue, germline gene editing, to modify future people born somewhere in space. Maybe we will wish to adapt them better, but I see a lot of risk here. Like, for instance, sex selection, like, for instance, looking for some features. Someone should prepare some policy, what is desirable, and how we will be sure that everything what is presented as desirable on space is desirable from environmental point of view. Someone will say that, okay, because of environmental constraints, but we will say we can make some political and social changes in this environment. We can design this environment according to some will, some power, some authority. So I see the risk of some policy of social selection, social design of future society, which can be good or bad. Always it will represent someone's point of view. Also, the issue of abortion, we see how this issue is still hot and challenged, at least in the United States, also in other countries. Everything is connected to maybe taking control over women. Like, some people are thinking about it, that we are talking about abortion. If we are taking care about fetus, why we don't take care about hungry children in all the world? In this case, you should the same think about that. So everything also about women, about the risk of further oppression. So I see there's a lot of challenges, and I am sure that we can face them really. But of course, it's a very far and very long future.
I have an idea about that. If we take that to the extreme, if people are born in space and stay in space, then maybe we'll evolve into a new species called Homo Spacians.
You know, it's interesting you said that, because I was, as I was listening to this, I was writing down that we might be at the cusp of watching our species take a next step in terms of evolution. We may be watching it. And I think in the past, species evolve. That's what's happened over the course of time. But we now have a level of consciousness in terms of our, our mental abilities, and we've not had a chance to ourselves live on Earth long enough with consciousness to see this kind of evolution. And here we are, maybe about to see some interesting changes in our species. Who knows?
We'll get rid of feet. We'll look more like dolphins because we won't need feet anymore.
Who needs a spine?
Okay, another question here regarding applicability. Doesn't it seem like there are translatable concepts from our remote medicine efforts to food and medical deserts in certain metropolitan areas, notably in the United States? I see remote monitoring and AI being applicable. Any thoughts on that?
Can you ask the question again? Because
Yeah,
I'm trying to determine if it's a spin in or spin out question.
Can we, okay. Are there translatable concepts from our remote medicine efforts to food and medical deserts in certain metropolitan areas?
So translating those to metropolitan areas?
Right. I guess so, yeah.
When I think of that, I sort of think of the concept of green buildings and, enclosed environments, and how to, within our large cities, instead of constructing buildings the way we do now, to think about new architectural design that incorporates some of those concepts. Particularly around, the value of the green environment for human well-being. I'm not sure I'm answering the question. I'm not sure that was actually the intent of the question, to be honest.
No, but that's an interesting point, though, that, could we take it to the point where we say what we're learning about space medicine or health in space could actually be applied here on Earth and deal with things like climate change?
Mm-hmm. And I think that actually is the case. And maybe Kristi wants to comment on some of the environmental stuff. But I would say that some of the technologies we're developing in terms of Earth monitoring, certainly from the space agency investment in technology, plays a role in our well-being on Earth. But she may want to discuss more about how that translates into space.
Yeah, for sure. So just to backtrack a little bit, especially when looking at like space medicine and then medicine in remote areas. So of course, with the advent of our wonderful COVID pandemic, a lot of us turned to telehealth and telemedicine, which has been great, which we've been using on the International Space Station for a really long time. And now it's readily available to a lot of, especially remote areas in the United States that can't really access great medical care. And then in particular, I'm a big ultrasound buff. So point of care ultrasound is, I think, the way of the future. We use ultrasound up on the International Space Station, works great, can diagnose a bunch of things, can also be used through telemedicine also. So we definitely have seen that in the advent, especially when we look at our Indian health reservation program, especially in the remote areas where there's not really a doctor, maybe a mid-level provider or one physician, there's not access to a big hospital with a bunch of different types of tests. There's a way to use this telemedicine as a way to help diagnose patients and triage them, which I feel like definitely this pandemic has definitely pushed this forward, but then again was technology that we have been using up in the International Space Station. And then of course, with regards to food and food deserts and things like that, of course, like mentioned before, Earth monitoring programs looking at climate change and weather, kind of helping us to create kind of a plan. So we're able to kind of see from up above what's kind of happening with weather systems and what's going to happen with food shortages. And I don't think this necessarily helps us, grow food more effectively on Earth, but I think it definitely can help us predict when bad things are going to happen and kind of can see the trends and therefore kind of put our minds more like in prevention and being like, okay, so we know that, this area is getting hotter and they're having more landslides. So we have to tell these people that maybe they should move their, crops to a different area and things like that. So I think it more so is for major planning than I think, specifically helping communities at this point.
We have another question here. Do you feel space medicine will change the age-old ideas in medicine? For example, resuscitation medicine, trauma, mechanical ventilation, oxygen, free radicals. Do you think we're going to see a change in the basics?
I do. Yes, I do think so. Some of the things that we, I'll give an example. Like in radiation, traditionally we think about avoidance of the radiation and shielding of the radiation, but shielding is not really possible with galactic radiation. It's different from the radiation that we have on Earth. So now we start to think about pharmaceutical use in a different way, and are there pharmaceuticals that we can use to preload, to treat, to prevent the health effects of radiation. So alternative uses of traditional, not only medication, but also devices, like, for example, imaging of the chest traditionally has been done with chest x-ray, and Kristi will be happy to hear me use the word ultrasound, and the variety of ways and applications for ultrasound technology as a result of space has been fairly significant, extending from, even bone imaging. So I think the short answer to that is definitely.
Mm-hmm. Now there's a follow-on question here. When will we have surgery in space? Is that even possible?
Well, I can take a first stab at that one too. I don't want to hog it, and I'll step back shortly. But surgery is not just a situation of sort of suturing a wound. It can be fairly complex in the sense that you need to have anesthesia, there needs to be pain management, there needs to be substantive resource, and you also need to deal with post-operative care. So I think there's the first steps of surgery, perhaps, suturing of laceration or something like that, which is a surgical technique, versus the management of massive trauma and what it would take in terms of resource planning, and if you utilize all of your IV fluids in the first week of a mission if something happens. So I would think that one would hope that prevention of those kind of things would be the focus. Could it be done? I know there's quite a lot of people working on those concepts and trying to make that become a reality.
Well, is there more work going on into microsurgery, so you don't need to open wounds as much?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think in your first panel, there was allusion to Andy Kirkpatrick's work here in Canada in terms of, when you open the abdomen, how different is that from when you do it laparoscopically? And then as we continue to miniaturize and we continue to have image-guided, accessible options, I imagine for healthcare on Earth, the trend towards that will be highly valuable as a terrestrial solution, not just a space-related, sort of esoteric interest for space. It's got definite terrestrial benefit.
Dr. Socek, we haven't heard from you for a while,
Yeah,
so I have a question here. I have a question here that's directed to you. The question is, how far should we go? With more humans in space, there's conversation about health rights beyond Earth. What's it look like today, and what might we need to change with commercial and recreational space travel?
So I think that what can be challenging here, I think that one of challenges is mentioned here about the issue of invasiveness and reversibility. If let's say that we should apply some procedure which is invasive, much more than in comparable situation on Earth. In such situation, I think that our ethical evaluation and also the right to apply such procedure will depend on this, if it's reversible or not, and how invasive it is. I think this is some key point of reference. And another thought is that we may expect that some health rights beyond Earth must be different than those on Earth. So if we recognize the necessity of such difference and such change, if we are ready to say that our next step should be to establish two different systems of health rights. So my point is, if we can have such situation that simultaneously we will have two different systems of health rights, of medical ethics, one applied to the same people on Earth, but if this person is changing environment from Earth to space, can we say that other rules applied, like example of abortion? I know that it's applied only to some specific scenario in very far future, but I think it's a very good example to illustrate my point that let's say that abortion in particular spacefaring country in the future will be rather prohibited or to some sense restricted, but maybe in a space environment our approach would be more liberal. So this is my point, that we can have more liberal approach to many issues, more permissive and more liberal to many biomedical issues in space environment than on Earth. And I also think that space can be the first broad human environment of our activity, where we can expect some serious modifications in our moral thinking about some issues. It will be not military context, it will be not the context of some beauty surgery on Earth or other issues, but it can be the context of space.
Make it the great leveling field, in other words.
Yes.
Level playing field. We have a question here regarding opportunities for current PhD students in cognitive neuroscience. I'm eager to know, what are the possibilities for doing postdocs in space health-related research areas? Who would like to take that?
So I know in Texas, there are a lot of opportunities for postdocs in space-related, especially at Baylor and some of the UT programs, as well as in New York and Florida. So there is a lot of opportunities, especially in the United States, that carry a lot of funding from NSF and NIH, especially on neuro research in space biology.
I could add that I'm not a cognitive neuroscientist myself, but certainly if you were to touch base with individuals in the Canadian Space Health Research Network, you would get some firsthand experience and be able to at least get some advice on their perspective, because there are researchers in Canada in that field. I don't know specifically if there's postdoc opportunities. I think that's a nuanced type of question they may be able to help you answer.
Well, Canada certainly specialized that at the beginning of our space program on disorientation in space and all of that, motion sickness and stuff. That was a lot of Canadian research done both at York University and UofT, right? So how are we doing for time here? It's 8:45. Yeah. Let's see, where can we go? Innovation includes education. So what does the future of space medicine training look like in Canada?
Well, I would be thrilled to speak about that, since that's been part of my life's work. So I'd be happy to say there's been enthusiasm in the field. Historically, aerospace medicine was not even a recognized discipline in this country until roughly 2012 to 14 timeframe, at which point it was recognized by the Royal College as a discipline. And since that time, there's been a committee within the college to build that discipline and to develop an area of focused competence in that at the Royal College. What that means, though, is that we are also developing a training program. It is a fellowship training program at the University of Toronto in aerospace medicine. So that's a step forward. We have some continuing medical education opportunities in that there are accredited rounds in the field for physicians in the field to learn in short 1 hour time blocks with those lectures like recorded and available. We have the Canadian, the CSAM, Canadian Society of Aerospace Medicine, recently developed, and the CSTARS, the student and resident organization of that, was, I think, in one of your breakout sessions in between the first and second panel. There are a number of summer internships also available with Zenith Canada Pathways and with the University of Western Ontario. So there are emerging opportunities, and there are emerging scholarship opportunities as well from various organizations. So we're going in the right direction, I would say. What it looks like, though, and will it ever be as big as the US? You know, we don't have our own launching capability, and we have a smaller astronaut corps. So we'll see where commercial space takes us, and whether or not that demand is a fantastic push to move. Canada has really got a lot of brain power in evidence-based medicine. And so, you know, Canada can be a leader in the brain economy.
Mm-hmm. This is a question that keeps coming up. In economically challenging times, some may say that space science should not be a funding priority. Can space science and research as it intersects with medicine be beneficial in these times? Please share your perspectives. Now, Dr. Ray, you were talking earlier about prevention being a key thing here before we go into space, make sure that people are healthy. What about reversing that idea and saying, well, let's deal with prevention down here on Earth and spin that off up into space? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, you know, it is a question we get often is, you know, especially economic hardship, or we feel like, you know, there's a lot of instability in the world. Why are we putting all of our money into space? And not so much related to the question you asked, but for me, you know, it's kind of the revitalization of hope. And I think it's really important for communities, even, you know, kids who grow up in, you know, poor countries, or that, you know, have seen war and terrible things that unfortunately still happen, is like this idea that, you know, they can become something, and that there is funding, you know, for research and projects, and, you know, kids looking up at the stars and like seeing science and kind of giving that motivation and hope that we haven't had for a while. So I think with the revitalization of that, it's really helpful. But I do think it's really difficult, you know, with economic burdens to kind of support space. But like I mentioned before, we do a lot of work, you know, a lot of the research that we do up in space does really benefit the people down here, especially like we mentioned, prevention and things like that, especially with our countermeasures. Those are a lot of things that we've used now, you know, radiation injury with hyperbaric oxygen therapy and the concussion protocols. And just like certain physical therapy techniques that we use, you know, these are all things that, you know, we've taken from space, and we probably wouldn't really have, you know, if we have had that opportunity.
I also know that at least from the Canadian perspective, space is not that expensive. If you take the annual budget of the Canadian Space Agency and divide that into the population of Canada, it works out to about $10 a year.
That's perfection.
$10. So we spend more on beer. We spend more on Halloween than we do on the space program. So it's not, there are lots of other places you can find money than picking on the space program. I'm just curious, we're getting close to the end here. Dr. Sojcik, what's your take on the whole ethics of focusing on space with benefits to the Earth as opposed to the other way around?
So my point is that because if I understand such concerns such kind of concerns and objections come from the hidden, sometimes not hidden assumption that it's useless. Yes, going to space, talking about space, doing something in the context of space is useless, mostly when we compare it with challenges on Earth. But my point is that humans are doing a lot of useless stuff, and we shouldn't approach the context of investing in space from the point of view of economic profits, because what about sport? What about art? If we are really so concerned about environment, of course I am and we are, but if we really take care for every dollar, in this case, let's stop investing in sport, let's stop investing in art, for instance, and put all this money to environmental issues. So this is my point of view, that humans are doing a lot of useless stuff. Of course, it's sport can be beneficial in some sense, but art, I am not sure, maybe we should cut funding for art, for culture, and send everything for environmental concerns. But as long as we are not doing this, I will never look at funding space like something useless until we will not stop funding sport and art. I think space should be the next step.
Okay, I have one final question, and this is to each of you. What questions do you personally hope to see answered in the near future about space medicine? Dr. Sari.
A couple of questions that I would like to see answered, and we didn't touch on it too much in either of the panels, are the value, well, it's not really a question, it's a comment about the significant role and opportunity within Canada to take advantage of concepts such as AI, machine learning, simulation and training, and the merging and the overlay in the Venn diagram of those Canadian capabilities, and how can we best move those forward. Really, if you want me to ask one question, the question would be, when will Canada's role firmly be defined in terms of what is the next step for Canada as we move towards the multilateral next agreements with the expansion of other international partnerships. I think we've seen already the beginnings of that with some signatures on some accords, but it'll be interesting to see as we go forward how space medicine can find a rightful place among all of the valuable contributions Canada can make to an international partnership.
And Dr. Ray, what do you personally hope to see answered in the near future about space medicine?
I'm definitely one of those who really supports access for all. So mainly in the future, I just really want to see space open access for those with some medical issues that we haven't had before, some physical disabilities, and even those that we normally wouldn't consider, as candidates for astronauts, unfortunately, in the United States, such as people that are transgender, things like that. That's kind of where I hope to have those questions answered by having these people go up to space.
Dr. Sojcik?
So the same issues like Kristi Ray mentioned now regarding gender, regarding all human diversity, disability, and this is very important because I think that we have now a chance to start to create new human society, finally equal. We shouldn't repeat the same categories regarding sex, class, race, able or disabled. We shouldn't take these categories again into space context. We have now a chance to create something new finally in new environment. And my another point is that human isolation from psychological point of view, how we will cope, how people in space will cope with real isolation, confinement, in long-term missions, having in mind this distance from Earth. It's not like analog on Earth that they know that the experiment can be stopped anytime, in any moment. When humans will be really very far, like some interplanetary mission in the future, how it will influence human psychology, social behavior, moral behavior. I think this is something which we don't know.
When I was a kid, I was inspired by a story written by Arthur C. Clarke called Islands in the Sky. And it was a story about a young boy, my age, 7 years old, who won a ticket to space from the back of a cereal box to go up and see the new space hotel that was being built that later showed up in the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. And when he went up there, he met the head of construction who was building this big space hotel. And that person was a double amputee. And he said, up here, I'm free. I can go anywhere. He didn't have legs. He said, I can go anywhere. I can get into small spaces that other people can't do. Back on Earth, I'm in a wheelchair. And I was so impressed by that. So diversity for everyone in space is certainly an issue that we can't let go forever. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Thank you so much. And I'll put it back to Ray. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob, and thank you all for such a wonderful conversation and discussion. I would just like everyone to join me in extending a virtual applause for our panel. On behalf of UofT Talks, thank you all again, our esteemed speakers, for joining us tonight and participating in such an insightful discussion.
So as you may have noticed, we have added the same prompt question from the start of the event to now. So we invite you to fill it out again and notice, have your answers changed since the start of the event? So I could share how one of my answers have changed. At the beginning of the event, I basically just said space doctors, like doctors in space doing emergency surgeries was all I could really think of. But I think a lot of themes came out that during both panels that really stuck with me. And I think one of them was about thinking long term. So, you know, from settler colonization of planets to bioethics, things that we're not prioritizing right now because it's not urgent. But at some point we will need to consider them. And I think, you know, on the future of space medicine, something that Dr. Kristi Ray kept saying was, we don't know what we don't know. And I think that personally that resonated with me a lot as a graduate student. But simultaneously, it's inspiring for a lot of us here, I think, for us to go out and figure out what it is that we don't know. And now I'm sitting here thinking, maybe I should kind of turn my PhD somehow into a space medicine direction. But what about you, Samantha?
I mean, that's a very interesting point that you bring up, because as Dr. Sari was sharing with us, that UofT will soon have a fellowship program in aerospace medicine. So that's very interesting. And the fact that we have more funding towards this niche sort of sector to develop, I think is amazing. With regards to the question in terms of how it changed my thought processes, I think definitely the idea of accessibility came up, right? In terms of, you know, like to what extent does items such as hyperbaric oxygen therapy, physical therapy, these aspects that are associated with space exploration, how does that affect, for instance, things like telemedicine or virtual care? It would be nice for, I think Dr. Ray it was that mentioned, you know, indigenous populations and in terms of delivering care for them in this manner, right? In terms of virtual care. So, you know, hopefully we can see more changes. And let's see what some of the other answers were. Endless opportunities. Yeah, I think hope comes to mind. Someone said those exact words, right? In terms of what can happen next. It's very exciting. There's a lot more resources, telemedicine, absolutely.
Yeah, I really like equal opportunities. I think in panel one, Dr. Shauna Pandya actually said, you know, if any of these topics are sparking an interest in you, we need you. And just talking about in panel two, how really anyone could go into space. If you have the money, you can go. So I think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, but definitely agree. Equal opportunities was a key theme that came up too.
Perfect. So again, we would also love to hear everyone else's feedback with regards to tonight's symposium. So please consider completing our post-event survey for a chance to win one of 5 $30 gift cards. You can find the link to the survey in the chat box, and the winners for this survey would be contacted by email. Beautiful. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Dr. Mingyao Liu, Director of the Institute of Medical Science, for some concluding remarks.
Hi, everyone. This is really my great pleasure to be at this event. The UofT Talk is organized by IMS student, and especially by the IMS Student Association. This has been a tradition in IMS, and the topic of the UofT Talk is choosing across all the different disciplines in the University of Toronto. Now, this particular the session is really a unique that bring the space and the medicine together, and it's really a very challenging and a very interesting. So again, our student did a fantastic job. I think I attended every UofT talk except one, and I was traveling, so I asked Dr. Mel Silverman to represent me to participate. But I really enjoyed every session of this, and I participated all of this. I learned a lot, and thank you very much. So I really want to take this opportunity to thank our moderator, Bob McDonald, for leading the insightful discussions, and our invited panelists and from all different institutions for sharing their expertise, and also our community partners for creating the opportunity for discussion in the workshops. So I kind of sneak into a couple of workshops and try to see what's going on, and really very much interested. It's really a good opportunity for people to talk to each other. And also I want to take this opportunity to recognize our dedicated students on the UofT Talk, and especially the UofT Talks lead. And I can not pronounce very well, but forgive me for my pronunciation. That's not very accurate. Even you guys are all my students, but you know, it is a challenge to pronounce the names in Canada because we all come from different cultural background. So our lead is Sakayam Foruzan and Kayla Lee and Sajivan Sujisan and Samantha Laura. So, and also particularly I want to thank our deputy lead Muzaffar Bhatti, and he spent quite a time with me to guide me to do the troubleshooting to help me to finally log into this events. Without his help, and I guess I'm crying in front of my own computer. And also thanks to our co-president of AMSA, Serena and Kevin. So they are the strong leader and lead our student group so well. So thank you very much. So finally, I would like to invite some of our event lead to say a few closing announcement on behalf of the organization committees. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. I'm joined now by some of my fellow lead event organizers. So on behalf of the Interstellar Health Symposium and UofT Talks, we would like to acknowledge and thank the Institute of Medical Science SAFE Committee and our pillar sponsors, Manulife and MBNA, for their support of tonight's event. At UofT Talks, we are passionate about bringing accessible, engaging, and interesting topics to an audience beyond academia. It has been such a privilege to learn with everyone this evening about a topic that fascinates so many, but we may not have always had opportunities to learn about in traditional educational settings.
We're also so grateful for the hard work and dedication of our incredible students whose faces you see currently on screen. These are the faces who helped come together and make this event possible. So thank you all, thank all and each every one of them for your contributions, your voices, and all the laughs along the way. Finally, our sincerest thank you to all of you in attendance tonight for setting aside time to join us and learn about space medicine and its implications for human health. We wish you all a healthy and happy evening. Take care. Good night.